Hello guys, Airsick Hydra here and welcome back for another inquisitorial rant. Today's video was supposed to be a discussion, or rather an essay, that I had written up to send over to Neocore to discuss melee versus ranged combat, the problems with it and why melee feels so damn weak. What I thought I'd do instead is do a video on this, give everyone the opportunity to like or dislike me, and put your comments down below so we can all have a go at giving a little bit of input on this topic. So, the problem is, in a nutshell, that melee feels weak. Now, I'm going to try and define the problem in a little bit more detail. It is important to be pedantic here, be a little bit anal, because, well, if we're talking about solutions, you need to actually have correctly diagnosed the problem. So, melee feeling weak. Damage output first. Damage output between melee and ranged is pretty comparable and very easy to balance. You tweak a few numbers, but essentially the melee numbers are the same as the ranged numbers, and you have a few leap and dash abilities to get you around from place to place a bit quicker. Ranged units will always have the advantage of being able to shoot to their left, shoot to their right, and kill targets a little bit quicker, but when both taking down a Dreadnought, the figures, the numbers are fairly consistent. Now, then the actual character differences between a melee character and a ranged character, again, it's no real difference because you're the same damn character. You just change what equipment you're using. The problem lies, and this is not unique to Inquisitor Martyr, but the problem lies in the fact you take a bucket ton more damage as a melee, because you're running towards the enemy, lining up their gun barrels with your face, and therefore you're not juking any of their shots, you're absorbing or sponging all of them. Then to make matters worse, you've got a guy with a sword, attacking or trying to swipe your bum off, whereas your ranged compadre is just kiting them quite happily. And then to make matters even worse, something unique to Inquisitor Martyr is your mate that's got a ranged weapon is hiding behind cover, taking even less damage, and you're standing out in the open like a melee with your sword, like a lemon with your sword rather, taking an absolute crap ton of damage. In a traditional ARPG, they normally calculate the difference as being about 30% more damage taken for a melee class. In Inquisitor Martyr, honestly, it feels more like 200%. You rarely have to use an inoculator as a ranged character once you're a little bit further into the game, whereas as a melee, there is a lot more oh shit buttons. Or rather, oh shit moments. And that leads me neatly onto the next point. Why this is so important is because we have limited amount of in-combat healing. That's right, the inoculator system within the game of Inquisitor Martyr is not based on how many enemies you killed, which most other ARPGs do. It's based on a set amount per mission. So in most other games, the quicker you're ploughing through enemies as a melee, the more regeneration you get. So basically it perpetuates the combat, it keeps it moving nice and quick. Obviously, they didn't want to do that, they wanted a more tactical feel, which the inoculator does do, but the problem is the inoculator is a no shit button. It's something you press when you're low on health inside combat, and the issue is, as a melee, you have a lot more oh shit moments compared to a ranged character, who barely has any oh shit moments. This is a big issue. As I mentioned before as well, the cover system really does exacerbate the difference between ranged and melee, because you're obviously not using the cover system as a melee particularly often, so you take loads more damage, you lose loads more suppression. It's a really rough time being a melee. So this is not unique to Inquisitor Martyr, first up. This has happened in every ARPG known to man. Now, what's typically done is you take a melee class and you give them some extra mitigation to try and fix the problem. In Diablo 3, they took the Barbarian, they took the Monk, and they just said, right, you guys, as well as having more armor, etc., and other stuff, we're going to give you just 30% more damage mitigation to counter this dilemma. And for them, that actually worked quite well. They got it to a decent state of balance. Now here's the problem, we're actually, irregardless of what you are, being it ranged or melee, you're still the same character, so you can't give your character 30% more mitigation when using one weapon and 30% less when using another. It doesn't really add up or make sense. You have to tie it to the weapon rather than the character, and herein is where they've added dodge and deflect onto the melee weapons. Now here's the problem. First problem is it's far too low as a base. So where we got 30% in Diablo, and as I say in Inquisitor I think it would need to be even higher than 30%, that's mitigation though. What we have is a percentage chance dodge deflect, so it's essentially a dodge mechanic, no matter what you want to call it for either character, and it's a chance to mitigate a hit. So what that means is you're prone to taking more spike damage, which is not really ideal. And as well as that, the values when first starting are far too low. They're something like 10%. If you have a shield, might be up to 15, but it's nowhere near enough to make you feel comparable to the ranged. And this is where the problem really is, because if you gave a starting character 30% deflect, issue number one, they're going to be taking a load of spike damage because dodge is not consistent, unlike percentage mitigation of armor, which Diablo 3 went for. The second problem is that then scaling becomes an issue as well, because dodge is not affected by diminishing returns like armor is. You can give a character 30% more armor in the early game, and then as they build more and more and more, you have a diminishing return chart, so every time you add 100 armor onto your character, it becomes a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. Dodge doesn't work that way. Deflect doesn't work that way. They could change the system to be a rating rather than a static percentage and give it diminishing returns that way, but I don't think this is ideal. So this is a bit of the problem that they have with the system they've gone for. It's not ideal, and it's not enough to make your characters comparable, ranged or melee, in the early game. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense and you're still with me. Hang in there, guys. So what can we do? What can we do? Because our characters are dying. Well, we can invest skill points and we can invest armor and defensive abilities into making our melee more viable. Fine, fair enough. You can do this and your character will become viable eventually. That is fine. But if you've invested 15 talent points to get yourself to a point where you don't take as much damage as you take a similar amount of damage to the ranged character counterpart, then your ranged character counterpart has spent 15 talent points on doing more damage. So you're still behind them either way. You're constantly trying to chase up and compensate for the fact that you just take too much damage. This is a problem. It needs to be a static buff given to the character day one. So when you first log in, you have something that mitigates for the fact that you're going to take a bucket ton of damage. Now, it doesn't have to be armor, it doesn't have to be mitigation. They could change a form of healing mechanics, so the more melee damage you do, the more healing you get. They could go loads of different routes with this, but it has to either be one of two things. Something tied to the character, which increases either your sustain or decreases the damage taken, and I think we've ruled out damage taken because we can't give the character armor, and we talked about the problems giving them extra percentage mitigation via deflect and dodge, etc. I think the solution actually for me is an odd one. I don't think I've ever seen this in a game before, but to me this is the only thing that would make sense. Make every single ranged enemy deal 30% less ranged damage when in hand-to-hand combat with you. That sounds a bit weird. It doesn't make much sense. But it's the only way to guarantee that as a melee character you take a percentage base less damage, which is really what you need in order to make the class feel a little bit more balanced. Either that or you just keep playing around with the abilities and making them better or worse, but either way you're always going to be taking more damage and you're always going to have this issue. So I think do the reverse of what pistols have, where pistols deal more damage when you're close to an enemy. Have enemies deal less damage, maybe because, well, explaining this is going to be difficult. I'm not really that in tune with physics. I would maybe argue that the projectile hasn't reached its terminal velocity yet, so it's not going to be as damaging to you and does a little bit less. Or maybe that because you're so close to the enemy, you're engaged in combat, their ranged weapons are going to be less effective. Make them do less damage though, don't make them hit you less. Again, that brings us back to the spike damage problem. Guys, hopefully this is one idea which is viable. I would like to know what you think needs to be done. Do you just need to do more damage? Are you happy taking more damage but dealing more damage? Is that going to work in harder difficulties though? That's what I would ask you. Do they need to change something else? I would love to know your ideas. Maybe we could have armor specific to the melees, which would have more mitigation but prevent you from using a ranged weapon. That would also be an idea, but that would really detract from the customization available within the game at the moment. So we've ranted about this quite a bit, haven't we? We've done pretty well. Guys, I'd love to know your ideas down below. Devs, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about this too. I can't wait to see what you do to make Melee catch up. And I know you will. I know you will. You're working hard. Guys, have a great weekend. Hope you enjoyed the video. Something to think about. Food for thought. See you next time.